In 1910, the census showed that there were 1,100 black people in Forsyth County, Georgia. By the end of 1912, there were zero. 100 years later, I went to high school at North Forsyth High School in Forsyth County, Georgia, and I thought it was strange that there were almost no black students at my school, maybe a dozen or so at a high school with over 2,000 students. It wasn't until I left Georgia and went to college at Duke in Durham, North Carolina, that I first learned the history of violent and extremist racism that drove 100% of Forsyth County's black residents out of the region in 1912 and dissuaded black people from moving to Forsyth County for almost 8 decades after that. In 1987, Oprah Winfrey visited Forsyth County and called it the most racist county in America. My guest today on the show, Durwood Snead, started a scholarship to help descendants of the black families who were violently expelled from Forsyth County in 1912 to get a college education. He says this scholarship doesn't fix the past, it isn't enough, it's not justice, but it is an act of love and a way to continue to tell the story. My interview with Durwood has some moments where our internet connection is shaky, so heads up, you might hear a word or two get dropped during the interview. Join me for a conversation about racism, history, truth, and love. If you are listening to this podcast, this is your show. So as always, please send me your thoughts, questions, and suggestions at brian@simplecharity.org. And if the show is helpful, click a 5-star rating in your podcast app. Also click like and subscribe. All these little actions help out our show a lot. Thank you for taking time to do them. I'm Brian Grasso. This is the Simple Charity Podcast, a show about learning to love generously like Jesus. I'm so glad you're with us today. Well, hi, Durwood Snead. Welcome to the Simple Charity Podcast.
Hey, thank you so much, Brian. A pleasure to be here.
Durwood, what are you grateful for today?
Wow. I have a grateful list that is so long. I mean, it's hard to even prioritize that to determine what to say first. I'm really grateful for God and his love and his care for me. Man, I'm for knowing him. I'm so grateful for my family. I've got a wife and 5 children and 17 grandchildren. We're just so blessed with all that. I'm grateful for health. I've got a lot of friends around me that are very sick at my age. We see a lot of that. And so, man, my list could go on and on. So that may take the whole podcast if we do all of that. That's a few things.
It's awesome. Yeah, you have 17. I think my mom now has, I think we have 17 as well, Durwood, of the grandkids. So we're tied for now. I don't know if are you going to get any more?
Possibly.
Possibly.
One son and his wife that are fostering 2 children right now that they hope to adopt.
Well, Durwood, I think we first met at a Hope International event and have become friends since then and interacted a number of times and like to get breakfast together. And I like to just pick your brain on your vast knowledge on global missions. And it's interesting to me that we're doing this podcast episode, and I'm sure we'll share a little bit of your bio in the introduction. But we're not here to talk about global missions. We're here to talk about Forsyth County, Georgia, which is where I grew up, went to elementary, middle, and high school here, K through 12. And then I lived in North Carolina for 10 years and have since moved back to Forsyth County. Plan to send my kids here. I think if there's any place in my life that feels like home, it is this place. And it has a history that I didn't even know growing up here and have since learned that you have been on a journey of digging into. So maybe we could start actually with this place. We would start with talking about Forsyth County, Georgia. Can you just tell us a little bit of the history of Forsyth County? And let's just go back kind of to the start of the 20th century and talk about it from there.
Okay. If you don't mind, I'm going to go just very briefly just to the very beginning because I think it kind of relates to the whole story.
Great.
So, in Georgia, the area that Forsyth County is right now used to be Cherokee Indian territory. And fascinating thing was the Cherokee took it over in a war with the Creek Indians really only about 30 to 50 years before the Cherokee occupied this territory. So this whole area was kind of a war land for a long time, but very rural, just woods, rivers, creeks. So gold was discovered in this area, basically in Dahlonega, Georgia, but basically the gold vein ran through Forsyth County in 1829. And the decision was made fairly quickly that there was too much wealth in this entire area for us to leave this Cherokee Indian land. So the decision was made by our federal government that we need to do something else with the Cherokee, and that actually started the Trail of Tears that occurred in the late 1830s. But in 1832, this county was formed, basically because gold was found. And
Mm.
well, the white settlers felt like they needed to. Population of the county then was very small. I actually found out there was a census in 1835 that said that there were, I think, 166 Cherokee that lived in Forsyth County in 1835 before they were sent to Oklahoma. But the fascinating thing to me was that those 166 owned 260 some slaves that were owned by the Cherokee that were black slaves that they brought with them to Oklahoma. So interesting history there. So then we're going to fast forward. Obviously, we had the Civil War that happened literally 30 some years after the county was formed. Then there was emancipation. And in 1860, there were about, let's see, I think the census said there were 899 slaves, black slaves in Forsyth County in 1860, just before the Civil War started. And then emancipation happens in 1865, and black people grew in this entire area. And so let's go forward to 1900. We move into the 20th century. Still, this is a very agrarian society, but the land here was not great for farming. And so there were no big farms. There had never been plantations here prior to the Civil War, because again, it's not great farming land, and primarily occupied by, other people and just a few people that would really venture to come in that were still here after the gold prospecting era, because the gold prospecting era ended pretty quickly. They found some gold in the 1830s, and then after that, there was not very much gold around. And most of the people that actually got land here for gold prospecting abandoned it fairly quickly or sold it fairly quickly and said, well, we didn't find any, so we're going to go somewhere else. This place is too remote, right? But the population of the county grew gradually, and by 1910, the population of the county was about 12,000 people, and there were roughly 1,100 black people that lived in the county in 1910. I think the census said 1089 or something like that. And so censuses
So
are now,
something like 10% ish
yeah,
of the county.
yeah, but that's right, about that. So then we think about the fact that where did people live? So black people in the county lived all over the county. We partnered with the Atlanta Historical Society, or the Atlanta History Center, and they actually tracked where all the black people lived in the 1910 census in the county. And they lived all over the county, pretty much everywhere where white people lived. But a series of events occurred in 1912, and this was only 6 years after what was called the Atlanta Race War or the Atlanta Race Massacre, depending on whose perspective it is. But in 1906, in downtown Atlanta, there was a huge conflict between black people and white people. I think it originally had started because there were a number of white people that were visiting black businesses in downtown Atlanta, and a lot of the white businesses were being affected by that, by these black businesses taking their business. So a number of white people went to these black people and said, you can't take our business anymore. So they actually started violence in the area, and there was a shootout in downtown Atlanta, and far more black people were shot than white people, okay? At one point, a number of black people sequestered themselves in the area that's now kind of the area where Spelman College is and Morehouse and all of those are. And they were doing that for protection, but also so they could kind of regroup. And my understanding is that then finally there was a truce, and there was a bit of a line of demarcation in downtown Atlanta saying, white people stay on this side of the line, black people stay on this side of the line, and that way we can have peace. And that began some formalized segregation in downtown Atlanta. But that was 1906. So literally just 6 years later, in this racially charged environment, a series of events occurred in Forsyth County that are still talked about quite a bit today. And it was in September of 1912. And on a Thursday of this one week, there was a lady named Ellen Grice, who was white, that claimed that she had been raped by two black men in the south part of the county. Later, those charges, so these black men were arrested, but later those charges against those black men were dismissed for almost no evidence. And most people felt that Ellen had kind of gotten caught in a very compromising situation. And as a result, she was just trying to blame other people to get out of it. So that was on Thursday. And then on Saturday, there was a black minister in downtown Cumming, which is the county seat of Forsyth County, that publicly made a statement about Ellen Grice saying, everybody knows her reputation. Why would you arrest these men and believe her? And this black minister got beaten within an inch of his life by a white mob in downtown Cumming. That was on Saturday. The following day on Sunday, there was an 18-year-old white girl named May Crow who was walking from her aunt's house back to her mom's house on Sunday afternoon, and she went missing. She didn't arrive back home. She didn't arrive home all night. They sent search parties out looking for her. And this is a very rural, small community. They found her the next morning, unconscious. She had been beaten. She had been assaulted. She had been raped. She was still alive, and she lived for 15 days. And during that 15-day time period, it was very sad. She had her 19th birthday, and then she died 15 days later. Well, the racially charged community went nuts. And now the reputation of Forsyth County started taking off, and people saying that black people are now raping our white women, and a mob mentality developed. 4 black people were arrested on Maycrow Street for the crime against her with very little evidence. One man named Rob Edwards was pulled out of jail and lynched the very night that he was arrested. He was beaten to death with a crowbar. His body was strung up on a telephone pole. People shot into his body during the night, and then they dragged him through the street. It was absolutely awful. In fact, Rob Edwards' memory is preserved at the Legacy Museum in Montgomery, Alabama. And a jar of dirt from Forsyth County is there to commemorate that. And we have a jar of dirt here in the county at the Historical Society to commemorate that lynching. And there's even a plaque in downtown Cumming of talking about lynching in Forsyth to commemorate that. But in addition to Rob Edwards, there was a 16-year-old and a 17-year-old boy, a guy named Ernest Knox and another guy named Oscar Daniel. And they were both convicted of killing Meg Crow. They were barefoot. They were illiterate. They probably had no idea what was going on. There was almost no evidence, but they were convicted and publicly hung about 30 days after their trial. I think there was a law then that you had to wait 30 days after you were conviction before the trial if there was any appeal or something like that. So they were hung in October, and there were about 5,000 people, almost half the population of the county, that was there to view the hanging as a public hanging. It wasn't even supposed to be public. There was a law against public hanging, but they did it anyway. All of that happened literally, first of all, the Ellen Grice's assault and Meg Crow, and then the arrest of these people, Rob Edwards, all that happened between Thursday and Monday, okay, of 1 week. But then night riders began going around to homes throughout the county, to every black home in the county, shooting in homes, blowing up some homes, and telling black people, if you don't leave immediately, we will kill you. And so by the end of the year, every black person in Forsyth County was gone. It was a complete racial expulsion of about 1,100 people. We know that there were, as I mentioned, about 1,100 in the census 2 years before, but literally in a period from September to December, they were all gone. And the county remained almost completely white for 80 years. So in 1989, there was a census in 1990 that showed that there were 14 black people, 1-4, in the county in 1990. So from 1912 to 1990, from 0 to 14. The 1980 census showed that there was 1 black person that lived in Forsyth County. There were events in 1987 that occurred that were what we'll call brotherhood marches, led by a guy named Hosea Williams, who was a black activist and an Atlanta city councilman. The first of those 2 marches was very violent. when those marchers came to Forsyth County, they were met with people throwing bottles, hurling insults at them. And the police actually stopped the march and said, "You guys need to leave. You can come back later, but it's too dangerous for you to be here now." And 2 weeks later, they did another march that was well protected by the National Guard, by state police, by lots of law enforcement. And that was a peaceful march. But there was still lots of people in the audience in 1987 that were very angry and upset. And then Oprah Winfrey came and did her very first road show in Forsyth County, Georgia in
I was gonna
1980.
ask you. I was gonna ask
Yeah,
you about Oprah. Yeah,
and
1987.
yeah,
You can look this up on YouTube,
right,
and
right.
it's fascinating to watch. But can you just tell us, like, maybe paint the picture of that town hall with Oprah?
Yes. So they met at a place off of what's now called Brownsbridge Road, a place called, I think it was Cadillac Ranch, and it was like a event facility. She invited lots of people in the community, people that were extremely racist, and also people that really were more encouraged to try to bring diversity into the county. And she just began doing a Q&A with all those people. But some of the people who were very racist were just so angry and adamant about the fact that we don't want Black people in this county. And at one point, Oprah turned to one of them and said, "I'm standing here. You do know I'm Black, right?" Because she couldn't believe some of the comments that were being made. And I'm so impressed
Yeah.
that she was able to hold it together in the middle of all of that, right? And pull that together. Then, that helped to really understand, I think for all of us, the makeup of the county in 1980s. It was very, there were people that were very compassionate and wanted others to live here. They wanted more diversity in the county. And then there were others that, no, we don't want the problems of downtown Atlanta. They have all this crime. We don't want to bring that up here. And so I moved here in 1989, as I mentioned. And one of the reasons I moved here is so that my children could grow up in a more rural environment and not just be in the yuppie neighborhood of Atlanta where there are a bunch of middle class or upper middle class wealthy people. What I didn't
Which
know,
which is ironic if you look at Forsyth County
I,
today.
right? And it was diverse in that way. Like my son's baseball coach smoked and chewed in the dugout, right? And so there was that diversity, but there wasn't the diversity of race. There were not other, diverse. Now we're very different today, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But going back to 1912, and I was a missions pastor at our church for almost 18 years, and I've traveled around the world. I've been to Bosnia, I've been to Rwanda, I've been to lots of places where there've been genocide. And it seems to me that almost the exact same thing happened in Forsyth County, Georgia, that's happened in many of these other places, which is one group begins feeling threatened by another group. In this case, it was both groups, but it was white people feeling threatened by Black people. This rumor that was a lie began going around that Black people are trying to take over, they're raping our women, and they're getting ready to take over the town and the county, and they're going to drive us all out, right? And then suddenly they're able to dehumanize these people that are threatening them to the point where they're not people any longer. And the same thing happened in Bosnia and Rwanda. In Rwanda, the one group, the Hutus, began calling the Tutsis cockroaches. We need to get rid of the cockroaches. And suddenly they're not people anymore. The Nazis called the Jews dogs, and called them all kinds of things, again, dehumanizing them. And suddenly you're not treating them like a human, like an equal anymore, but it's almost like an object that's a pest that we need to get rid of. And that's what happened here. It was all grounded in fear, where people were fearful about what was going to happen. And it's so much easier for us to group people in buckets rather than as individuals and to say this group is just like this, when it could have just been one or two people that were the problem and that we group it all together. And it's easier for us to take society and life, I think, and just treat it that way. And one of the things I've learned more and more, and Martin Luther King said this, so we need to judge each person by their character, and not by the color of their skin, or anything else that kind of equates them with other groups of people. But in this county, it was driven by fear. And there were many white people in the county that didn't want these Black people to live because many of the Black people were working with them or working for them and providing important services in the county. This was an agricultural rural community Many of these black people were farm workers working on farms that white people owned, but 58 of these black people owned property and were farming their own property. One black guy owned 200 acres, another owned 60 acres in the county. And we haven't been able to track down exactly how they got that, whether this was land that was bought over time or whether it was land for them after emancipation. We're just not sure, but it almost doesn't matter. But most of those people too had to leave land, and many of them lost it.
Let's keep going with the story of Forsyth County and the Forsyth Descendants Scholarship, and then I actually do want
Yeah,
to, near the end of this conversation, ask you your thoughts on some, I guess, bigger
okay,
issues that are. I think this can be a microcosm for how we as believers maybe think about race. I feel like I want to give this caveat, Durwood, listening to you talk about all of this. You know that you are not woke, like that
right,
you are not like
right, right. No,
a liberal. Like I don't think anyone who knows you would say Durwood Snead
no,
is very liberal in his politics or anything like that. So I just wanted to say
right.
like that is
Yeah,
not necessarily where this is coming from. I mean, what's interesting
no,
about Forsyth County today is that it is a very red county. It's the county that gave us Marjorie Taylor Greene. I think she went to South Forsyth High School. I went to North Forsyth High School. And so just thinking about this issue, I kind of want to try to take it out of politics. Not that we can do that completely, but just to say this is a conversation around, I think, reconciliation and love. And so I want to have that conversation. But before we get into those issues, it kind of like, are there things we can learn from this as a case study?
yeah,
Tell us more about the Forsyth Descendants Scholarship, and
yeah,
just I guess keep going with the story,
yeah.
and I could even jump in for a moment to say, I went to high school in Forsyth County. Like I said, in the early 2000s, went to elementary, middle, and high school, and there were like 5 black people at my high school when I went to high school in the 2010s. And it was just this thing that I didn't know, honestly, any of the history. And it was
Right,
already changing very fast. But I did think it was strange, that
right.
there was just a black people in Forsyth
Sure.
County.
Yeah.
Um,
So my story on all this is I was a business guy for 26 years in corporate business, and then kind of had a radical career change when I was 50 years old and began working for our church and was the director of everything we did internationally. We called it Global X, but it was missions, and then became a pastor there. But race had never been an issue that I really, just to be real honest, really cared that much about. I mean, I cared casually and yet was never really involved in the civil rights movement or any of those things. I mean, I was feeling that, hey, these people need to have justice, but it wasn't my thing, right? And so about 6 years ago, I have a little fishing boat that's near Lake Lanier, which is a big lake that we have here. And I was driving to my boat and I saw a little sign on the side of the road very near my boat yard that said Oscarville Way. And the thought just came to my mind, and I now realize it was kind of the Holy Spirit saying, huh, must have been a town named Oscarville here at some point. And I'd never heard of Oscarville and didn't know what that was. And so I came home that night, made a little mental note, Googled it, and then suddenly discovered this story from 1912 that Oscarville was ground zero for where May Crow lived, and she's still buried there, where these people were arrested, where this crime occurred, and where all the black people that were involved that were hung or lynched came from. It was this little town called Oscarville. And once I learned this story, I learned about this book called Blood at the Root that a guy named Patrick Phillips wrote. And Patrick Phillips grew up in Forsyth County like you did, Brian. He did 10 years of research on this story, wrote this book, and now he's a professor at Stanford University. But as I read the story together with my wife and got to the point where people were being driven out of the county, and I imagined being one of these black men who was a father and a husband who could not take care of his family and prevent leaving and having to go somewhere else, being driven out in shame, and to go somewhere where you weren't wanted and to not know where that would be or where you would work and to leave everything behind if we owned land, or even if I didn't own land, leaving the place where we lived and my job. I literally got so sad and tears started coming to my eyes saying, I imagine being on this band. That is just awful and terrible. And then I heard worse stories, like one guy who was leaving with his family and he got separated from part of his family and he never saw his wife and two of his daughters again. And the assumption was they drowned in the Chattahoochee River because they couldn't go over the bridge over the river because there were bad people on the bridge. And then it got sadder. So I went to I wrote to Patrick Phillips and wrote Blood at the Root, and he got back to me and he said, well, interestingly enough, another guy's written to me who's a pastor in the county, like a pastor named Adam Johnson, who's a pastor at Brownsbridge Community Church. And I said, you got to be kidding. Adam's one of my best friends. We've never talked about this. I call Adam up, go over to his house one Sunday afternoon, and we met for several hours. We talked and we prayed. And we both felt that, and Adam had already learned this story, I think about a year before I did. And we both thought that we feel like we need to do something that, number one, simply acknowledges what happened for all of our Black brothers and sisters, many of whom were carrying this burden and hiding it in their family because it was so shameful and so hurtful, and no one had really publicly acknowledged it in a big way. But we said we feel like we also need to do something that could be not just acknowledging, but be helpful to the next generation of descendants of these Black people that were expelled in 1912. We then brought the whole idea to a group that Adam was already a part of, and I now am a part of, called the Forsyth County Ministerial Association. It's an association of about 30 pastors and nonprofit leaders around the county. We came to them and we brought this story to them. We asked them and said, did any of you know this story? And almost no one knew the story. And these are all pastors throughout the county, here in Forsyth County, that didn't know what happened. No, we knew there was something that happened. We weren't sure what. So out of that, we all began talking and praying, and we came up with this idea for a college scholarship.
Hi, my name is Melissa, and I serve as a Simple Charity philanthropic advisor to individuals, couples, families, foundations, and family offices in the Raleigh-Durham, Chapel Hill area of North Carolina, but also to clients around the country. If you're curious about your own generosity journey and would like help thinking through a philanthropic strategy with intentionality to discern where God is calling you to love people, to find excellent nonprofits to partner with, or to understand the impact of your current grant making, I would love to connect and share more about Simple Charity's philanthropic advising offerings. You can connect with me at melissahall@simplecharity.org. That's Melissa Hall at simplecharity.org. And you can learn more about us at simplecharity.org. That's simplecharity.org.
We went to some of our Black friends, first of all, just to ask them, is this even a good idea? Because we're a bunch of white people that our hearts have been touched by this. We feel like God wants us to do something, but is it a good idea? And I got some great advice from one Black friend who told me, look, as long as you understand that this doesn't fix anything, this is not justice, this is not a reckoning, this is not reparations, as long as you understand that, yeah, we think it's a good idea because we feel like it's better to do something than to do nothing. Some of my Black friends even warned me. They said, look, don't stop because some of our other Black brothers and sisters may say this is not enough. Acknowledge that up front. It's not enough.
Yeah.
But stop because it's not enough. Do something. And then I went to some of our white friends, and quite frankly, this was a very racially charged time in Forsyth County.
Yeah. Sure. Well, in the country, right? I mean, when was this?
Black Matter was going on.
Yeah.
Discussion about the 1619 Project, about critical race theory.
Yeah.
All things are going on around the country too. And so I started going to some leaders saying, wait a minute, is this part of one of these other movements? And we said, no, we're not making any judgment at all about any of the other movements, but this has nothing to do with that. This is simply an act of love. And we feel like it's important to acknowledge what happened. And if we really are followers of Jesus and care about our Black brothers and sisters, to let them know that we acknowledge this happened and we're so sorry. We didn't do it. We weren't alive, everything then, but it happened, and it happened on this geography, on this ground.
Yeah.
A little bit of pushback from some people, and I understand it, saying, why are we dragging up stuff from the past? We feel like we're doing well, things are moving in the right direction. But I was trying to help some of my friends who had not talked to their Black brothers and sisters about this understand that this county has a brand on it, just like a brand on an animal, right? Or the scarlet letter, that Forsyth County is branded with what happened in 1912 and the expulsion of all the Black people. And I told them, we will never lose the brand of what happened. The only thing we can change is to show people that's not who we are now. That we now are a county of love and acceptance, and everybody is welcome in this county. And the only way we show that is by what we do. So the only thing you can do to try to get rid of that brand is try to bury it, because it's still a raw brand in the eyes of many Black brothers.
That's right.
Country.
Yeah, that's right. And I do think that this is I think fear is such a powerful emotion. Like if there's a fear or a sense of feeling unwelcomed, if you're in a party and you have friends there and you feel welcomed, you're familiar with the place, then you're going to walk around, you're going to be confident, you're going to be fine. But if you're at that party and you have even the thought in your head, I don't know if I'm welcomed here, then that's going to impact the way you engage and show up. And just thinking about Forsyth County's brand, Oprah did say, she called it the most racist county in America. That was the brand. And not that long ago, a couple of generations ago. It was interesting, Durwood, hearing you talk about Rwanda and the genocide there, and just this kind of thing that can happen where groups of people, whether it's split on racial lines or ethnic lines or tribal lines, and can demonize and dehumanize each other. And Rwanda has actually had an amazing reconciliation story since then, and is this amazing African success story in the 21st century. And I also think about obviously South Africa is not perfect, but post-apartheid, there was in both cases a truth and reconciliation committee and a truth and reconciliation process. And part of that was just telling the truth, the full truth. And this feels a little bit like that. And that, in genocide contexts around the world, my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, you'd probably know more about this than I do, but there always has to be a truth and reconciliation process where the full truth is brought out into the open, it's aired out, and everyone acknowledges what happened. Do you think that would be one reason why, to your point, to kind of drag these things back up, to just talk about it? Because Black people, absolutely, this is
right.
I think I still get nervous, honestly, sometimes, Jared, when I talk to people in Atlanta who are Black and I tell them where I live, I still get a little bit nervous. And that's terrible,
Yeah. I used to, but I don't anymore, because I feel like, first of all, just what we're doing here, I'm anxious to really talk to them about it and to help. I've become a little bit of a ambassador for our county now, just because, hey, this is not who we are now. And quite frankly, one of the best places in America, I think, to live right now, because it's the best school system in the state, one of the best in the country. Okay. It's a safe place to live. We have a lot of diversity in the county. I wish we had more Black people that live here. It's still only about 5%. And yet most of that is because of the reputation of the past, not because of the conditions that are here. We have the highest percentage of South Asian population of any county in the South Asian or Indian population is over 20%. The school system, South Asian population, is about 35% currently. So it's a wonderful place in so many ways to live today. And yet at the same time, we need to continue to learn about what happened in the past and the love thing is something that is so important. But as you mentioned, truth sets everybody free. I mean, Jesus said that, and the Bible says that, and yet it really does. I mean, it's when you get down to truth, and it's so hard to get to full truth. Protective of a territory. And we see this right now during an election year, where obviously everybody wants to talk about their strong points. Nobody wants to talk about their weak points if they're running for office. Their opposite talk about their weakness, right? And so all this stuff gets thrown back and forth, and exaggerations and all these kind of things happen around it. And it's so divisive. And I feel like that if we just all laid the truth on the table, that would be a way better way to make an election decision.
Yeah.
You got pros and cons. Let's just put it out there. And now people decide, which one's the best. But instead, we decide based on who's got the most money to kind of put their big story out. The truth is so important, and it really does set everything free. It's true for all of us, right? But some of the friendships that have developed through this between Black families that were outside the county and part of those families that were expelled, and friendships with people inside the county, they are so precious now. People have just got to trust each other. They love each other. We're praying for each other. And even though this thing happened in the past, we realize that, okay, that happened. But as we talk about truth, and if we really do care about it, then that's what love requires. And in our logo for Forsyth County or Forsyth Descendants Scholarship is we have a map of Forsyth County with a name on the side, but we have a heart in the middle, because we want to remind people that this is an act of love. And our vision for the future is that this county that Oprah called the most racist county in America in 1987 would be known all over the world as the county of love. And that would be an inspiration that can happen here. It can happen anywhere in the world. And I truly believe that. And so as we've talked to people about that, there's not too many people when you go to them and say, well, don't you want to be known as the county of love? But who's going to say no to that?
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is part of that. It's in the logo. I mean, that's what this is. So we have been so encouraged by the fact that many people that were dissenters on board, and I wouldn't say they're actively pursuing, publicizing this, but they're certainly on board. They support us. They play in our golf tournament. And I love the fact that this scholarship, not only is it helping a number of students that might have a difficult time going to college, go to college, but this scholarship is also keeping this on the table.
Yeah. Yeah, it's telling the story. Tell us about the impact of the scholarship.
So far, we've had 25 recipients. We've had 8 of them that have graduated from college. They are in a number of different states. So while all these people's families started here in Georgia, they ended up moving up around the U.S. And so a number of places around. We have mentors that we offer for each of these recipients in their field of study. And so quite a few of them have actually gotten jobs through their mentors that have come through that. The scholarship is competitive. You have to prove descendancy, and we have a genealogist that's helping with that, back to the 1910 census, which is the last census we had.
Wow. So you're going back to the descendants of the people who were expelled. And
yeah.
Okay.
So descendancy back to 1910 census, because the expulsion was 2 years later. 2.5 GPA, then they have to write a series of essays, but the main one is an essay on the journey of their family after expulsion. The Atlanta History Center got on board too and did a 5-part podcast on this whole story.
Oh,
and then they
I didn't know that.
They interviewed over 20 people that are elderly descendants to try to capture their stories about what happened. And they wanted to capture those for posterity kind of going forward. So, cool things have happened. We have a cemetery in the county that was a Black cemetery that was destroyed, that's now been reclaimed. All the bodies, where they are identified. We don't know the names of all the people, but they've identified like 180 bodies in that cemetery and where they are, and put crosses up over them. So I feel like there's been a lot of cool things that have happened, but the main thing I think of the scholarship is allowing a lot of these kids to go to college that would have had a hard time doing it otherwise, because the scholarship's up to $10,000 per year, 4 years. But the other thing is in the families, helping to bring the story to light. of what happened in their family. And many families have told us, by our son or our grandson having to do this research to write their essay, it's actually brought to light so many things in our family that we had buried.
What's the name of that podcast, Durwood, that does the 5-part deep dive? Where can folks find it?
But if you can find it, you just go to the Atlanta History Center.
Okay.
I think .org. Let me look real quick. Yep.
Great. Yeah. So that's a resource, and I think you also mentioned a book.
I'm sorry, we have it all on our website too.
So you have it on your website. Great, excellent. So you just go to Forsyth Descendants Scholarship.
So just go forsythscholarship.org,
Awesome.
and then you click courses, and it has links to all the news stories and all these other resources, including Patrick Phillips' book.
I want to go somewhere a little bit philosophical. So you mentioned, your Black friends telling you as you were starting the scholarship that, this is not justice. Don't say this is justice. And that this is really an act of love. And I'm very interested in love as a framework for pro-social action versus justice as a framework for pro-social action. And I think there's been this big push, even in the church, towards using the language of justice. We want justice is better. Justice is kind of, a lot of times people define it as shalom, as this restorative justice, not just restitution. It's about holistic flourishing. So I think we've added some meaning to the word justice. Maybe that has always been there. But at the same time, I think we live in this amazingly hyper polarized political environment where in our political environment, everyone wants justice. They just have different ideas of what justice means. And so we just fight about it. And it feels like this quagmire, because it's like, okay, if everyone's claiming that they want justice, but if you have different information or different beliefs about the way the world is and what is fair and what is right, you mentioned reparations. Is that the right thing to do? Is that bad for white people now? And you can argue about that. And I think those arguments are worth happening. I think that's actually how we all learn and grow, is to have those disagreements together. But setting all that aside, you get in the Bible this call to love that is the highest command in Christian doctrine. Jesus says it's the greatest commandment in the Old Testament. Paul says it's the greatest virtue. It's greater than faith, greater than hope. Paul says if we don't have love, it doesn't matter anything else we do. I think you could make an argument from the New Testament pretty clearly that if love is not an animating force in our lives and hearts, we probably haven't really come to know Jesus yet. It is the hallmark of the authentic Christian life, and theologians from forever have said that. I think love is this motivating force that we have to have, and I almost want to say sometimes that we need to talk more about love than justice. We need to talk more about what the world would be like if we learned to love our neighbors. And to do that as much as we can and have capacity to sacrificially, to try to do it like Jesus. And you can't do that all the time. You can't sacrifice constantly all the time, but maybe in key moments. And I almost feel like I'm a little bit tired of politics, but I'm tired of this narrative of justice is really what we need. And I think what we really need is a richer, fuller definition of love, and thinking about living that out into action. Because thinking about the scholarship as an example, to have compassion and empathize with our Black brothers and sisters, to tell this story that's extremely painful, and then to offer a scholarship to kids who want to go to college now who are descendants. Of course, love, all those things can be from a place of love. So anyways, any thoughts on that? Which is more important, Durwood, love or justice?
Well, I think, like you mentioned, Scripture teaches us love is the most important thing. And if you don't have that, nothing else matters. But I feel like that's one of the things that love leads to, is justice.
That's right.
Here, if we care for another person, and that's what's more important, I think, is caring for a person rather than a group. It's hard to have love for a group, you know, but it's much easier to have love for a person, and that's what's more important. And as we begin simply loving one and getting to know them and hearing their perspective, we understand more about other people that might be or have experienced some of the same things that person has, right? And we get a little bit more insight as to what love is and how a person feels. A mentor of mine a long time ago kind of taught me that when you have a conflict with someone, and the Bible teaches this too, right? But when you have a conflict with someone, rather than kind of fighting it out with them, go have coffee. But I feel like that we need to do that more and more to people that we feel like maybe are our enemies or that we have some conflict with. Just sit down and talk. And I've only been to like a third of the countries in the world, but that's over 70 countries. And
Durwood.
And I couldn't sit down with and have a discussion and just simply talk about our families and talk about our children and grandchildren if we have them, and we couldn't be friends. And I remember the first time I went to the West Bank of Israel, to Palestine, I thought Palestinians hated America, and I didn't really like them very much, right? But I went there, served. We actually did a medical clinic in a little town on the West Bank, and sat down, and I got to know this one guy who was kind of the big evangelist for his faith there in that village. He was a rough guy. He looked like what we would classify as a terrorist. You know, he just had the look. And at the end of the week, he gives me this big bear hug and tells me how much he loves me. And we became such good friends. We helped each other, and I would pray for him regularly. He would pray to me. He was praying to Allah. I was praying to Jesus. I mean, we just developed this bond. And every time I would come, he said, "Hey, when Durwood would come to my house, you got to have him over my house. I have to have him see my kids and all these things." And so love, that's just what love is about. I think it's about individual spending time with people and just getting down with them. And you feel like if you don't understand somebody, don't criticize them publicly. Go have coffee with them, have a meal with them, listen to their story. And I think that's the other thing. Tell me your story. Usually when someone is angry about something, they've been hurt. I was in the church. A lot of people have been hurt by churches, right? And by people in churches, they felt like in their biggest time of need, maybe the church abandoned them because of something they had done. But people have been hurt, and we need to listen to their story. And in this Black and white community, there are people on both sides that have felt hurt. Black people obviously feeling very hurt by what happened to their ancestors and the expulsion, the terrible way they were treated, and about slavery before that. White people feeling hurt by the fact that many people today feel like we've got a reputation that we shouldn't have because we are a wonderful place now. We've got all these great people and we have this big diversity in the county and the stuff. And yet why do people keep calling us these names from before? So because you haven't ever sat down with the people to talk to them.
Yeah.
Conversations, right? And the press obviously elevates every kind of tension it can because it causes more readership. The press drives people away from the truth. I mean, don't reading it, and we need to learn from it. But at the same time, they are all about tension, because that's a good story. It's got tension in it. And people want to read that. Nobody wants to read about how wonderful everything is really around us. But love to me is the thing that requires reaching out your hand first to someone that you don't feel like you like or someone you feel like doesn't like you. And once you do that, make that first effort of reaching out your hand first, then you start having a conversation, and then it becomes personal. And you can have all kinds of differences and yet be friends and care about each other and care about each other's family and help each other's family, along the way, and so many of those things.
Yeah.
And I know, and the hard part is doing this yourself, because especially if we've been offended or if we feel like someone's against us, right? It's really hard to take that first step because, no, I want to be mad for a while. It even happens in marriage, right? You have a argument with your spouse and I'm right. I know I'm right in this. And so my dad told me a long time ago, yeah, you can be right and be lonely, so.
Yeah. I have a mentor who likes to say, you can either be right or you can be in relationship.
Yeah,
and so much wisdom here. Durwood, and I love just the idea of walking towards, people we might consider our enemies. It's very Jesus language, of
Mm.
loving our enemies, and I think it's one of the most radical things Jesus ever said is, if there's anyone in our life that we think of as an enemy, we probably should be taking some steps towards them. We probably should be praying for them, finding ways to serve them. Um, and we need that. We need to do that because honestly, the bitterness and anger and all of that is bad for us too. It's poison for our own souls to hold on
Yep.
to, that bitterness versus what's possible with reconciliation. Jared, if someone's listening to this and they live in Forsyth County and, um, they're moved by hearing some of this history, can you just say a word of I just want to ask you point blank. Like, let's say they live in Forsyth County and they have extra financial capacity. Why should they give to help descendants of the Black families that were expelled in 1912 in Forsyth County to go to college?
A great question. Because again, it is an act of love. These are families that have been very deeply affected generationally and yet have also shown tremendous resilience. This is not charity, but this is simply giving people a hand up. These are students that still have to go to college. They have to do the work. They have to make it. We're actually selecting the people that we feel like have the best chance of doing well and thriving because we have limited funds. But also want to mention too that all of us that work on this are volunteers, and all the giving to this is individual donations. And so there's no government money that's being given to any of this. This is simply private individuals that are giving. So I feel like it's this act of love that really helps to send a message to these families that there are people that care. And I know that some of these students have just soared in what they've accomplished in college. And now I'm excited about what they're going to do once they get out. We have one young lady right now that's just soared through University of Georgia. She's like at the top of her class. She's studied overseas for a semester, and I'm excited about to see where she's going to be next. Another young lady that was only able to go to community college, and because the scholarship was able to go to Auburn University, finished in 3.5 years, actually finished early, and same thing, she's now getting ready to get her master's. She's going to be soaring. But I love the fact too that you're investing in people that will be also taking this message of love, saying, let me tell you how I got through college. There was some people that cared enough because of what happened to my ancestors that they gave financially. And that helped me get a college education, and they're part of my story. So the biggest reason I think is if you want to be part of the story of a young person whose family has suffered, and yet part of their story going forward to help them pay the whole thing forward through their life, I think that's one of the biggest reasons to give.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good, Durwood. Thank you so much for what you're building, for telling the story, for building the scholarship, and just, I think as I move back here and with my 3 kids, and probably will raise my kids here and send them to Forsyth County schools. Oldest is going to Cumming Elementary School this next year, and I do believe that God puts us in places for reasons. And so I especially do want to say, like, if you live in Forsyth County and you're listening to this, consider supporting the Forsyth Descendants Scholarship. And I think the vision that you were communicating of what if Forsyth County was known as the most loving county in America. And I think the reality is these things happen over the span of generations. And I think places are transformed. It's slow. And yet I don't see how we could get there if we don't, to your point, do something. Not that we're going to fix everything that are the repercussions. You can't put pieces back into the box, but what we can do is in this moment, move forward in love. Any final words before our last question, Durwood?
I think the main thing is for people of faith is to pray that God would lead you into your part of what he's doing to spread love around the world. And I do feel like that he's got a part for each one of us, whether it's part of a story like this or part of another story of meeting another need that's out there. But he hasn't called any of us to do everything, but he's called each of us to do something. And prayer around that, I think, is the most important thing to have what we need to be involved in and what we need to be doing. What really breaks my heart is to see people, and I'm at a retirement age. I retired from ministry to take care of my wife a few years ago. But what really breaks my heart is to see people, though, that are not doing anything purposeful with their life, right? And not because I feel like that they're needed as much as this, I feel like they're missing some of the greatest joy of their life. Because if God created us specifically and crafted us, like he says in Ephesians 2:10, to do good works that he already has planned for us, that he planned it before we were born, that he has these things planned for us to do. And when we do them, we're in the center of his will and we feel this unbelievable fulfillment in life of being there. And if we don't, he's still going to get stuff done, God is, and yet we miss the huge blessing that he had for us for being part of what he's doing. And so that's the biggest advice I can give to anybody. I think we all just need to be praying more about show me what it is you have for me to learn and show me what it is you have for me to do.
Mm. And Durwood, last question for you. What are you learning in this season of life about what it means to love like Jesus?
I'm learning more about what God does for me. So I have a wife who was diagnosed with Alzheimer's in 2018, and she's in the later stage of the disease at this point. And I'm her primary caretaker. I've got help coming in as well. But what I've learned through that is, as I care for her, I'm learning how God cares for me. And I'm learning that at a much deeper level than I've ever learned in my life. And he cares for every one of us so deeply. But it's the things I'm doing for my wife, in the middle of that, I realize God's doing the exact same thing for me. And so often I miss it.
The invitation to grow this week is to invite someone who comes from a different racial or cultural background than you to hang out, get coffee, and connect as human beings. Thank you so much to Durwood Snead for joining me on the show. If you have feedback on this episode, you can reach me at brianwithnye@simplecharity.org. Next time on the show, a conversation with a biblical languages scholar about what the word love means in the original languages of the Bible. Have a great week. See you next time.